Okay, and I'm just going on Zoom Live, everyone. Thank you for making it. For everyone who is on the line, if you could kind of enter your name, your company, what city you're dialing in from. For the people who are live streaming as well, let us know what city you're coming from. If you want, put your LinkedIn so you can connect with other users on this call. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I'm out in Los Angeles this week working at El Camp, a workspace in El Segundo, California. If you're ever in LA and need a place to work, this is amazing. I'm in one of the soundproof phone booths right now, so I know it looks like I'm in a closet. Not sure if Eric Johns is on the line, but he's a CEO and he's created this amazing space. So once again, before we start, enter your name, your company, what city you're from, and we want you kind of engaging and conversing with each other. So, hello everyone. This is a microlearning, and it's a training and development that focuses on offering bite-sized small learning units with just the right amount of information to help our learners achieve a goal. So this is not a webinar where you passively listen to a talking head. We want you to immediately take 1, 2, 3 actions after we hang up. So it could be updating a will. It could be giving the password for your social accounts to a loved one. It might be researching the steps that you need to prepare for your demisal. It could be buying the book in case you get run over by a bus. So, and as we are community focused, we want you to connect with 1 to 3 new people on this call to really hold each other accountable, ping each other, add each other on LinkedIn. And today's topic is on how to organize your life for when you're not around. And we have the authors of In Case You Get Hit by a Bus. I'm excited to introduce them later on today. But quick exercise before we begin. Top right-hand side, put yourself on gallery mode. So we should look like the Brady Bunch. We always start our calls with a series of questions, okay? So if you answer yes to any of these, raise both hands like this. Got it? Okay. So how many of you have dependents? Could be adults or children who depend on you financially. How many of you have thought about death in the past year? How many of you have given access to pertinent passwords and files to someone, could be a significant other or family member in case of your untimely passing? Raise both hands. How many of you have loved ones who can access your digital photos and other documents and content, social platforms in the case of your demise? And last question, how many say that they are 100% prepared if they were to be run over by a bus today? Okay, thank you guys. For the next part, top right-hand side, if you can put this into speaker view, so you should only see me. Okay. Hello, everyone. So for this conversation, we're going to have, this conversation is really timely for me personally. I'm currently in Los Angeles to take care of my mom for the next 3 weeks. She's 85 and has dementia, and she can't really stay on her own. She has a live-in caregiver, but that person is going on vacation. So I left my husband and my 6-year-old daughter to be with her and take care of her while her caregiver is away. Almost 3 years ago, my mom almost died. Not once, but twice. She had 4 strokes in the space of a month. A year later, she had another series of strokes. So she was actually put in hospice twice. And the first time it happened, the doctor called my brother and I to her room, brought in the chaplain, a social worker, and a bevy of doctors to let my brother and I know that my mom had 2 weeks to live and to basically put her house in order. That was 3 years ago. And I'm happy to say that the worst case scenario didn't happen for almost 2 months, my brother and I were frantically trying to untangle my mother's belongings in her cramped 2-bedroom apartment. She didn't know where anything was. So after my mom had the stroke, she couldn't really communicate with us, which meant she couldn't give us power of attorney. She didn't have an advanced healthcare directive, and we didn't know she wanted to be kept alive if she was put on life support. We didn't know where she wanted to be buried. And fortunately or unfortunately, she didn't have much assets, but she literally had papers, mails, magazines from the past 20 years. She had money, not at the bank, but stuffed into tissue boxes and also cracker boxes. She kept graded papers and gifts that we gave her from when we were in grade school. All the school awards, certificates mixed in with little folded papers of tissue and other things. You see, people with dementia will often habitually fold up little pieces of paper and hide them throughout the house. And sometimes these little pieces of paper, which were literally tens of thousands of papers, had jewelry or money. So they were literally thousands of these balled up around her house. So fast forward the past year, all of us collectively went through this global pandemic where millions of people have lost their jobs around the world. Many of us were facing our mortality. I have a 6-year-old at home, and my husband and I were, playing all of these what if scenarios if one of us should pass. And all around us, we heard entire families getting struck with COVID, with both parents dying, leaving their children parentless. It was a wake-up call for all of us. And we realized we weren't prepared. So here's the thing, when people die, they leave behind a life that must be closed out. Their funeral must be planned, their bank accounts closed, their pets rehomed, and their final bills paid. The bureaucratic tasks take over a year to complete, all while you are grieving. So really quick, before I make my introduction to the authors, for the next part, in the comment section right now, for people who are live stream on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, you could put this in the comments. In the chat, I want you to answer, but don't press send yet. Answer the following question. Why do most people avoid planning for when they're not around? Why do most people avoid planning for when they're not around? So even if you're on live stream, I want you to do this. Put this in the comments, and I'm going to count down, and we're going to press send together. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Press send. Okay, so read some of the comments. Don't want to think about their mortality. I see a lot of fear of death, denial, avoidance. There's a lot of denials, avoidance, afraid of bad luck, fear of acknowledging your own mortality. They don't like to think of death. Procrastination. Thank you guys. For all those folks who've kind of posted, I just really want you, I picked up this book probably like about 2 months ago, and I read it from beginning to end, and I bookmarked so many pages and dog-eared them. I had 10 people in my neighborhood basically purchase one, and all of them said this was amazing. If you haven't thought about it, and you have people who love you, you need to read this book, and you need to prepare. I lost my father when I was in my 20s, and he didn't leave any directive or anything. And I just remember spending a good part of my college years trying to figure it out with my mother. So the good thing is that now we have books like this, and I hope you pick it up. But I'm really excited for today's guests. We have Abby Schneiderman, who's a co-founder and co-CEO of Everplans. She's an industry expert in the areas of digital estate planning, technology, and consumerism. She's a Forbes.com contributor and has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. Adam Seifert, the co-founder and co-CEO of Everplans, has helped create multiple huge online communities and networks, and is the inventor of the social networking patent, now owned by LinkedIn. Gene Newman serves as the Everplans editorial and education director, and has spent his career as a writer, editor, and content leader for Maxim.com, Hatchet Digital, and other lifestyle properties. All three authors live in New York City. Without further ado, I would like to introduce them. Do you want to take it over, Jean?
I could take it over from here. Thank you so much. That was really an incredible introduction, and you spoke so eloquently about the need for this type of thinking, this type of planning, and we're really thrilled to be here today to have this conversation. And we'll stick around after this for questions too. But I thought maybe before we get into the details of what's inside this book, in case you get hit by a bus, I would give you the background on how Adam and Jean and I began working together, and really how this book came to be. And the idea really came about when I was planning my wedding, actually, back in 2010. And I was using all of these really helpful sites like the knot.com and Martha Stewart's websites, and I was on them every single day, on their apps and their guides and their calendars and their checklists. And I don't know why my brain went from marriage to death, but I started to think, what's next in life? And what are the other resources that are out there that are going to handhold me through the next stages of my life, in the same way that I was really handheld through wedding planning? And just started researching, and found that there were plenty of resources for getting married, plenty of resources for having kids, plenty of resources for buying a home, even financial planning, and then retirement planning. But after retirement planning, that was it. There were no other life stages covered online. And it didn't seem right that the only unavoidable life stage, and the most scary and overwhelming one, didn't have any helpful resources or tools to guide people. And being a tech entrepreneur, I started thinking, and I mentioned this idea to my friend and now longtime colleague, Adam Seifer, who's another tech veteran in New York. And together we got to work. And we started writing articles on everything from how do you create a will, to what do you wear to a funeral, to what does a healthcare proxy do? And Everplans was the result. And it grew quickly, proving that there was clearly a need for this type of information. And then a big part of our personal story is that a year after we developed this content website, my family experienced a death in my immediate family, which was that my brother, who was 51 years old, was on vacation with his family over the summer when he was on his way to lunch and killed by an impaired driver driving down the wrong side of the road. And everything for my family changed in that instant. And we were thrust into this position that so many families experience. We were obviously shocked and heartbroken, but we were really unsure of what to do next. And while my brother had made some financial arrangements, thank goodness, our family had no idea what he would have wanted. We had no idea what to do. We had no idea how to access his accounts. And suddenly we had to make all sorts of stressful and expensive decisions in an incredibly short amount of time. And this is actually a picture of us together when I think I was about 2 years old. But what this situation really made Adam and I realize was that in order to really make a difference for people at their time of greatest need, we have to help people get a plan in place ahead of time. That way, if a tragedy or emergency struck, families would have easy access to everything that they needed in one place. And so we began building our planning platform. And that's when our secret weapon, Jean, came aboard to help make the whole topic more relatable and accessible to all. And the book is really a culmination of everything that we've learned, and it will empower and inspire everyone to get a plan in place. But when we started writing the book, well over a year ago, we did not know that the world was going to change the way that it has, which we do address in the book's introduction. And Adam, if you don't mind taking it over for a bit.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, everybody. And that is a picture of my family, and that's who I do my planning for. And this was during the very first week of the pandemic. Remember back when wearing masks was a total novelty? It's completely mind-boggling how much the world has changed since then. And we, as Abby mentioned, addressed that in the introduction to our book. For more than 10 years, we have been obsessed with helping people get their lives organized in case something unexpected happens. By far, the most difficult part of our mission used to be convincing people that the unexpected actually happens, and that unexpected things could happen at any time, like getting hit by a bus, as our not so subtle title suggests. Then at the beginning of 2020, the entire world was hit by a bus in the form of a pandemic. The unexpected, the very thing our company was built around, became reality for just about everyone on the planet. Life as we knew it ground to a halt. Those families that could hunkered down to minimize the impact, and most everyone feared the worst. But there were undeniable bright spots too. A warm text from a friend you lost touch with years ago, a post on social media from someone on the road to recovery, a former coworker checking in to see if you were okay. Group video calls with family members became the norm, a chance at least to see each other's smiling faces and to poke fun at parents who spent half the call trying to figure out how to turn on their camera or their microphone. Birthdays, holidays, and graduations were celebrated remotely, but we could still be together. And these were the moments that made us forget how tough everything had become and focus on what's really important. The hope and strength we get from those we love, who themselves take strength from us in return.
The feelings of hope and despair that arise during a crisis can often motivate us to make lasting, positive life changes. But as memories fade and normal routines return, that feeling of hope and purpose can diminish. This book is intended to help you renew, reinforce, and remind yourself of that hope for the rest of your life. And we believe that planning for your family and loved ones is the key. Our mission has always been to help as many people as possible prepare for the unexpected, to make sure that families aren't left unprepared, when the unexpected strikes, has now taken on an even greater, more solemn importance now. But really, it was always that way for us. And over time, as more and more people started using Everplans, we realized that the site wasn't about death. It was about life. Because getting everything organized now lets you live to the fullest, knowing that you've done everything you can for those that you love. And that's what you'll find in this book, a plan to do just that. And it's easier than you think. And speaking of other loved ones, here are my kids during COVID last summer. Here's a good question to consider as you're getting started. What's important to you? Most people will simply say family, but we want you to go deeper than that. What's really important to you? Doesn't have to be one thing. Our lives aren't that simple. It might be something that hurts a little or even makes you uncomfortable to think about, because being challenged can spring us into action. We all have different motivations. Maybe you witnessed the chaos a friend experienced after the death of a family member and don't want your own family to suffer the same fate. A parent might be terrified at the prospect of their young kids being raised by an unfit guardian, or worse, in foster care. Money is often the cause of most issues. Perhaps you don't want your family going to war over what you leave behind. Or maybe it's as simple as you waking up in the middle of the night completely wrought at a pandemic that went from a story on the news to our new reality. Once you have a clear vision of your purpose, think of it as a picture-in-picture box on a TV screen following you around throughout the book. And that picture might have an image of your kids, your spouse, your partner, your siblings, your puppy, or a person that you loved who is now gone. And when you get discouraged or overwhelmed, take a second, visualize that image in your head, and then repeat this mantra: this is why I plan. So now that you know where we're coming from, Jean's going to give the framework in which we help you get your entire life in order without losing your mind.
Thanks so much, Abby. Adam, we're so happy to be here. This is so interesting. And I want to explain how the book is broken up, and it's 3 levels, and each builds on the last to help you gather and organize all the stuff that you already have, all the things that you need or you want, and ways to add personal touches to truly make it yours. Everything we cover throughout the entire book has something called a plan of attack, which tells you exactly how to get that thing done, how long it should take, and an estimate of the cost, if there is any. There are other elements scattered throughout that are called they're called side missions, and these may or may not apply to your life. Like if you have young kids, if you're caring for aging parents, if you run a small business, or so many other scenarios that you could think of. And we also have something called break times. Now, these break up each level, and they cover things like when you should update your plan, certain milestones in your life, how to have difficult conversations with family members without, things going off the rails and emotions getting the better of everybody. And what are the unfortunate consequences if you haven't done any planning at all? Even though the book covers every possible component of a person's life, it's broken down into easy to digest pieces to prevent you from getting overwhelmed. We're going to give you a brief overview of each level so you know what to expect. And Abby's going to get us started with level 1.
Okay, level 1. This is where we start things off by helping you get the following things in your life under control, which includes a system for managing all your passwords and secret codes, your money and assets organized so that you don't have a panic attack, an instruction manual for your home and vehicles, and a decluttered address book where your most useful contacts rise to the top. But if there's one thing that we mention in the book repeatedly, it's passwords. It's almost comical how many times we mention them, and we have no regrets because they've just become such a vital part of our lives in so many ways.
Yeah, the average internet user now has more than 130 different accounts. And of course, each of those accounts requires either an email or a username and a password. And so how do you think most people keep track of them? Well, according to a Pew Research Center study, 65% of people say that they keep them all in their head. So yeah, memorization is the dominant method, which means that either everyone is a super genius because I don't even know what I had for dinner last night, or what they're actually doing is they're reusing the same password for multiple websites, which we all know at this point is just asking for trouble. And it's one of the reasons why we're such big believers in password managers, and we're happy to talk more about that during the Q&A later on. But beyond the password issue, unlike your physical possessions, your digital assets aren't always obvious. Unlike your paintings and your bicycles and your vintage collection of Magnum PI lunchboxes, they're not just lying around the house, and so they can get lost or rendered inaccessible if you don't get them organized. And when we say digital assets, we're talking about both the hardware and the software. So it includes your phone and your computer and your iPad, but it also includes everything that's online or in the cloud, like your social media accounts, your shopping accounts, entertainment accounts, your family photos and videos, and so much more. And so all of this together is referred to as a digital estate plan. And we cover it from multiple angles throughout the entire book. And don't want to give away any spoilers and ruin the big surprise, but we start the book with passwords and we end with passwords. As Abby just mentioned, they're just that important these days. And then another important aspect that we cover in level 1 is managing your home and your important contacts.
Yeah, stop for a second and think about all that goes into running a household. This is one of our favorite illustrations from the book and shows how menacing a house can be if you don't know the ins and outs. From the mortgage or rent to the routine maintenance to the utility bills that you pay on a monthly and yearly basis. A typical household could have more than 15 utilities or vendors or services associated with it. And that doesn't even include how it's financed or any quirks that only you know about, like if part of the basement floods after a heavy storm. But now imagine your family trying to piece all of this together without you around to help. Do they even know where you keep the deed? Do the utilities in your name need to be canceled or transferred to someone else? If a pipe bursts, is there a trusted plumber that you call to get the job done who doesn't rip you off? What about maintenance or care instructions for the car? There are dozens of things that you have figured out over the years to help your home operate smoothly, which is why the book explains how to create something that we call a home operating system, which is a helpful and easy to compile instruction manual for the home. And we also provide a system to help you get all of the important contacts in your life organized, which can help your family in so many ways, whether it's for something routine or during an emergency or for when it's time to settle your estate. So you'll realize while reading the book, level 1 is about getting what you already have in order. And as we move on to level 2, you'll notice that we start adding some other elements into the mix.
Correct, because level 2 includes some of the more traditional aspects of estate planning, as well as a deeper dive into your digital world. And here's what you're going to have accomplished after you're done with this. You're going to know how to get a will and power of attorney in place, plus information on setting up a trust, how to organize all your bills and debts into a neat, non-depressing pile, how to compose what we call a personal medical journal, and learn everything you need to know about advanced healthcare directives. And you'll have brought order to every digital account and service that you use. Now, this level, it can appear stressful because it involves things that seem complicated, but we demystify it all and explain to you that by doing all this stuff, you're actually going to remove and eliminate stress from your life. Now, Adam has two personal examples about this, one involving a will, another involving medical directives, that really helps bring this all down to earth.
Yeah, so this is my father-in-law, Marvin, with my wife, Carrie. And Marvin was an incredible guy, and he died totally unexpectedly about 3 years ago. And even though we figured he didn't have a will, we weren't entirely sure. And so we spent the first few days searching all over the place just in case. And then because there was no will, there was no official executor, and my poor wife had to petition the court and go before a judge to become the administrator of his estate. And she had to put up a personal bond just so that she'd be allowed to do all the unpleasant stuff like shutting down credit cards and bank accounts and things like that. It's already all so yucky, and these extra steps made it extra difficult. And it really would have been pretty easy to avoid. Creating a will is not nearly as complicated or even as expensive as a lot of people think. And there are tons of free or inexpensive options online. And they cover the basics, and they can help you just get something in place. And if you have a more involved estate, like you've got a blended family or property in different countries or even states or complicated investments, then it's really well worth the cost of an estate attorney or a financial advisor to get it all completed once and for all, if only to save your family the unnecessary burden later. And now on the flip side of this, I want to talk to you a little bit about how advanced planning made all the difference for my mom and my family. And this is my mom, Joan. And here's where I talk to you about the importance of medical directives, which are often called advanced directives. And an advanced directive at its core is the combination of a living will, and that's what outlines which medical treatments you do or do not want. And then the naming of a healthcare proxy, which is the person that you trust to make medical decisions on your behalf if you can't do it. And the importance of these documents really just can't be overstated. And I experienced this with my mom, who unfortunately died just about 2 years ago after a really tough battle with cancer. And we were fortunate enough to have sat down together and taken some time several months before. And we sat down with her and my dad. And we straightened out her living will and her healthcare proxy. And then as a bonus, I got my dad's done while we were at it. And we discussed what was really important to her. And, of course, the conversation was weird at the beginning. But once we got going, it just started to flow. And then when the end came and she wasn't able to communicate anymore, I knew exactly what she wanted, which was to be home. And I knew what she didn't want. And because of that, there were no dramatic arguments with my family. And I wasn't tortured then, and I'm not tortured now, wondering if my decisions were the right ones. That little bit of communication and planning just gave us all so much peace, and it gave her control over her end. And, there was a study done by Stanford University recently that found that more than 80% of patients say that they wish to avoid hospitalization and high intensity care at the end of their lives and to die at home. And their wishes are often overridden. And while there are never any guarantees in life, having your medical and legal documents in place will definitely increase the likelihood that you end up getting what you want. And one of the great things about advanced directives is that they're totally free to do. You don't even need an attorney. And we actually have the templates for each state's advanced directives on our website at everplans.com, and we include a link in the book. So you can go find the forms for your state and hopefully just get this done once and for all. It's not that hard.
And we walk you through all of it in the book, along with a quick easy to understand reason as to what each of these legal or official documents provide and the decisions that you need to make. Here's a quick overview. Number one is your will. Who gets your assets, and do you need to name guardians for any dependents? And then power of attorney. Who should be making financial and legal decisions on your behalf if you can't? Advance directives, as Adam was just discussing. Who should be making health decisions on your behalf if you can't? And what sort of treatments do you want? When boiled down, it's that simple, and you'll find that most of your effort won't be in doing the paperwork, but really in just making the decisions. And finally, trusts. How to protect assets and even what trusts are in the first place, because they can get really complicated. Here are some questions for everyone here to think about. Do you have any of these documents in place already, or have you put off creating them? Do you want them, but you're just not sure where to start? One of the goals of the book, and Ever Plans, is to make sure that you create the plan that's best for you and your family. So do not hesitate, reach out to us, contact us if you need help with anything or any concerns that might be keeping this off your to-do list. And this brings us to the final level, which focuses on personalization.
Yes, level 3 allows you to personalize your plan with a slew of finishing touches, which include an organizational plan for all your meaningful photos, recipes, and family heirlooms, a record of your personal history, interests, beliefs, and life lessons, so everyone remembers you the way that you want to be remembered, a model for writing letters and recording videos for your family and friends that they can cherish for the rest of their lives, a complete understanding of everything you need to know about planning a funeral, plus a template to write your own obituary if you're up for it.
I want to share something that isn't in the final draft of the book, but it's a story I love, and so you could think of it as bonus footage. But I was talking about family traditions over the holidays. This was pre-COVID. And one of our dear family friends was hosting a brunch at her house. And she took me aside and she led me into another room. And she showed me something called a miniature chest drink table that her late mother had found antiquing in Canada. And Melanie recalled how her mother had 2 armchairs next to each other with a chest between them. And after she died, Melanie and her family were packing up the apartment, and they found notes on the back of her favorite things, including the chest. And it said, "For Melanie, little table, to Melanie, much love, Mom." She also left a note on the back of a Salvador Dali lithograph that Melanie had bought her in Paris that said, "My only Dali from my only Mel." The miniature table and Dali lithograph are beautiful, but the notes make them so much more meaningful. And this is obviously a beautiful way to express love and say goodbye, but it doesn't have to be a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. While the little table is now safely in Melanie's possession, what if she had never found the note? So cleaning out a late parent's home while grief-stricken could lead to discarding items that have a story to tell. The same goes for a family member swooping in and taking everything, especially if they think those items have value. A person that we work closely with told us how an in-law had looted all the classic furniture from a deceased parent's house before anyone had a chance to claim anything. And while this was many years ago and she's not even sure she wanted any of it, it's still a minor point of contention among the family. So anything that you can do now to prevent possible conflicts in the future is always a benefit, especially if it only requires some paper and tape or a few sticky notes.
And here's the thing I've learned working with Abby and Adam for all of these years. They, like many people here, most likely are obsessed with food. They're also incredible cooks. They're great. I've experienced it firsthand. And I insisted that each of them pick at least one of their favorite recipes, put it word for word in the book so people could understand how they could start organizing and sorting and saving their recipes so other generations can enjoy them as well. And now I would like the master chefs to explain their creations and what organizing recipes means to them. Abby, you get to go first.
Okay, well, this is my favorite part, but recipes are extremely important to me, as I'm sure they're important to many people here. My late beloved babysitter, Lydia, used to make the most incredible dulce de leche cookies. And she shared the recipe with me before she died. And every time I miss her, I make the cookies and they bring back the warmest memories. Plus, I get to share them with my kids, which now creates new memories for all of us. I didn't actually include that recipe in the book. I shared a different cookie recipe, which is my mandel bread recipe that was adapted from my grandmother's recipe and my mom's recipe. And you can see me here with my sister there on the left, showing my daughter, Danny, how to make the cookies. But Adam went a more savory route.
Yes, I chose something just a little spicier, and it's my chili recipe that I've been working on for over 30 years now. And there's a picture of it in my favorite yellow pot. That was my grandmother's pot. And I actually made my chili yesterday in that yellow pot, and it was awesome. And the recipe is in this great Excel spreadsheet that automatically recalculates the ingredient amounts based on the number of people that you're feeding. And I include like replacement options in case you have trouble finding one of the ingredients. There's even little tips like reminding you not to rub your eyes after you've been handling the chilies. And it means a lot to me. I'm working on it for a long time. And I think this notion of passing along highly meaningful family recipes plays into a host of other aspects that we include in the book around helping you keep your legacy alive. Think of all the personal lessons and tips and knowledge that you might like to leave behind, whether it's information about your family history that maybe nobody else in your family even knows, things that you've loved about your life, or just lessons that you want to pass on to future generations. Technically, this is all called an ethical will, but in the book, we like to call it Spill Your Life. And we break it down into like 6 rounds so that it feels more like a game show. And, this stuff might seem obvious, but when you're answering them, you'll realize how many of these questions do you wish you could have asked someone who's no longer around now?
And along those same lines, here's something I'm sure we can all agree with, which is helping others. Giving to charity is great, as is devoting your time to a cause. If you've done work to help others, whether it's regularly volunteering for events or being a big brother, a big sister, manning a phone for a telethon, giving donations to organizations or institutions that you're proud to support, and perhaps you've even gone a step further and allocated money from your estate to make sure the money gets to the right place. But these details should be clear and direct so that the people that you leave behind know to continue to support these causes in your honor. This brings us to the final part of the book and the inevitable part of life, the end.
And we were not kidding when we said we help you write your own obituary, because we include 4 templates from small all the way up to supersized obituary templates to allow you to help write or start, or also to help you write it for someone else if you have to do that. But before all of this, we walk you through every aspect of planning a funeral, including what needs to be done if you opt for burial or cremation, ways of putting money aside, and how to add personal touches to the service to truly make it yours.
And this might seem like a sensitive topic, but you could also view it as a practical discussion to have with your family. For example, at my brother's funeral, we probably paid way too much for the casket because we didn't know any better at the time. And when discussing this with my parents, my mom said her preference was for the plain pine box, but my dad surprised us all saying that he wanted the most expensive casket that we could find, which is good to know. We had no idea. But this is why communication is so vital, so that you're not spending too much money when you don't need to, or spending too little in the case of my dad.
Yes, communication is central to everything that we cover, because at the end of the day, sharing this information with others is what ultimately makes a plan complete. And we know it can be tricky to talk about some of these things with your loved ones. Talking with family can be littered with emotional or even suspicious landmines. And when the topics include money or medical issues or even death, it can be even more terrifying. Consider for a second that people would rather talk about no longer being on Earth than talk about their finances. And the Wells Fargo study that's pictured here and that's included in the book also revealed that although people aren't comfortable talking about money, it's one of the biggest stresses in their lives, often causing sleepless nights. And so we offer plenty of tips on how to eliminate the fear and the stress from these topics, and how to break the ice and to get your family talking and planning together.
Thank you so much. this barely scratches the surface of what's covered in the book. So definitely read it. We can't wait for you to see what you think and start working on your plan. And if you think the book isn't for you, I just have one final story. Before I started Everplans with Adam, I was explaining the concept of the company to my parents, and my dad said, I don't need this. All of my legal documents and important plans are with our estate attorney. And my mom turns to him and says, but wait, Milton, who's our estate attorney? So you might have a folder with legal documents and instructions or a file with an attorney, but our lives are made up of so much more. And plus, if no one knows where it is or, or where or who you did it with, it's sort of like you never did it at all. So the first step is getting started. The book helps you get started and so much more. Thank you so much for having us. We're here to answer any questions. And really, again, we're so thrilled to be here.
Thank you. I love this. This is amazing. So a little post from Lisa Bowman. This is amazing info. We just did our stuff, but not all of it, and maybe not the right way. I'm going to order this book ASAP. So when I read this book, I was telling Jean before everyone got on, I thought I had all the ducks in the row, and I thought, you have your will, your plan. And when I read the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about. I literally every page, I was like, oh shoot, I didn't think about this. What do I do with photographs? What do I do with recipes? All of these things. You have this one about your basement and basically having your household, where do you find the gas tank or the water lines? And, a lot of times in families, you'll have your significant other might handle certain parts of the house and you might do others. And not even being able to kind of communicate with each other in terms of where things are. I have no idea where our water line begins, right? The other thing in the book that I really thought was powerful, and you didn't mention today, was writing a letter to your loved ones and putting it in a box. For example, I'd want to write a letter to my daughter, right? Because what if something happens and you pass away unexpectedly? Being able to kind of have something that you could kind of give to a loved one is so powerful. So let me see. Amber, I know you have a question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to ask it?
Sure, Lan, I'm happy to. I was wondering if the book addresses at all the complexities of having your family members in other countries. What you've outlined is all so useful, but the added layer, I'm intimidated of needing to create those plans for my family members who are in Canada.
Very interesting, because most of this is focused on America right now. Because of the laws that we know in that, because when we start researching, and we've been researching in Canada and England and Australia and other places, a lot of times it's figuring out what you have to deal with here, but working with attorneys in other countries or making sure you know the details, because a lot of times dealing with the property, it'll involve the same thing. It could be deeds or titles or something along those lines. But ideally, it's starting by getting a list of all the property and things you're going to have to transfer, you're going to have to take over. And then from there, you have to work within the laws and the confines of that country. And that's why hiring someone, the same way we deal with people out of state. If you have property in different states, you have to do probate if you don't have it set up in a certain way in each one of those states. So if you have something in California, you have something in Colorado and Texas, you have to do 3 probates. You can't just consolidate it all into one place. So it's really smart, as Adam mentioned earlier in this, if you're dealing with any complexities like that, definitely speak with an estate attorney here, and then also one in that country to make sure you do it completely correct.
Awesome. And Denise, I love your comment about keeping copies of your updated resume, your personal files. You want to unmute and kind of maybe either give your comment or your question? Denise, if not, hi Denise.
Hi. Thank you. This is so fabulous, you all. Thank you so much. I have a small core family, so just my mother and I are kind of on top of everything. And then the other family members don't have their things together. But I figure I'm single and never married. I don't have any kids. Nobody's going to be able to tell my story but me. So I figured, I started doing this a few years ago, just keeping, like I said, an updated copy of my resume. And then I created my own bio, which is kind of one page. And it's really just a short, description of really my life. because nobody else will be able to do that but me.
I love that, Denise, because it's like, I'm kind of looking at it from like what to bring down to your family, but continuing your legacy if you are single or you want your struggles, your autobiography, who's going to tell your story? I love that. That's such a great idea. And I want to also kind of mention the comment. Monica has a really good one. I'm just going to read it. From personal experience, know your state laws and rules about DNR documents. You might have to be able to produce it during a critical event outside of a hospital. That's a really great tip. If you can't produce it, they will resuscitate you. Horrible experience for my mom when my stepdad passed. Thank you, Monica. You sound like a lawyer. And I mean that in a very good way.
I'm not a lawyer, but I have worked with them for many, many years.
And if it's really important to you to have a DNR honored, then make sure you keep copies of it, like on your refrigerator or in your
Yes, that's
car
what we did
or in
for
your
a friend of ours. Yeah.
purse or your wallet, because yeah, if they don't find it right away, they're gonna get to work doing the resuscitation.
But also my husband and I lived with a senior citizen friend of ours in Texas after my stepdad passed. So when taking her for all her surgeries, and that we learned this, and I had them, like you're saying, all over the house, a copy in my car, a copy in my husband's car, because each of us would drive her. And it wasn't just the DNR, it was the away from, there's a separate document in Texas, completely different from what is on file where her doctors had privileged hospital, because the DNR stays at the hospital. So ask, what do I need to provide if somebody has a critical event outside the hospital?
Having a lot of these questions answered before things get bad are so important. I just remember with my mom, when she had her stroke, she couldn't speak. And we didn't know what she wanted because we knew she didn't want to move to New York with me, and she was in California. And so she was at this point where she needed 24-hour care, but we both were in other cities and states. And we had basically looked for, it's not, like these kind of group care where there's like houses of 5 and a nurse. And we literally were going to bring her that day. And literally she just kind of like woke up and she's like, I'm not going. And if we had paid the person out already, we would have been in such a bad predicament because we had already kind of, we didn't sign any contracts, but we had said, yeah, she's going to come. And literally on the day of, somehow she realized through her stroke that we were taking her and she didn't want to leave her home. I want to also ask, let me see, I think we have a question. David Hansen. Hey, David, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I really just wanted to get some guidance about having a will versus a living trust when is most appropriate for various situations.
Yeah, I think, we're not estate attorneys, and so you should really speak to an estate attorney if you want guidance on whether or not it's right for your situation. But generally, the concept is a will is what happens to all of your assets after you die. And a trust or a living trust is when you actually give up those assets now and put them into a trust so they're no longer in your control. And the trustee controls them now. And it's frequently used as a combination of a way to optimize the taxes so that you're not paying probate or estate taxes on the assets that are in that trust. And it's also a way of establishing certain rules about how those assets can and can't be used. But you're actually giving up control over those assets now.
Yeah, and it's irrevocable trust, and there are other trusts that you set up where basically it's your property, you have to move it in and out and deal with that. But a lot of people have asked us, like, do I need a will or a trust? And it's not really an either or situation. You can't account for guardianship in a trust. Trust is only property. When it comes to naming an executor, because not everything you have, even if you create a trust, you're not going to put everything in there. Someone still has to pay your bills, deal with property. So unless you stay on top of it, and we always say, like, a will is pretty easy to create now. You could do it, and it's more work later going through probate. I believe Len mentioned at the beginning how it's could, be a year minimum just to get through all the processes. Whereas a trust is a lot more effort to set up now, more expense and everything, but on the back end, it could be more beneficial. But speaking with estate attorneys, and we have financial, just to really get a grasp on this concept, we've realized that they could really set up good plans based on what you need, and making sure that you can still have access to those assets, but also making sure that it's not something that's too expensive and unruly for you to manage during your lifetime.
One thing we should talk about, just because of the fact that it's the summer, for anybody here who has kids who are going off to college in September or August, one of the important pieces of documentation to make sure that you have is a HIPAA authorization, so that in the event that something happens to your child, has to go to the hospital for some reason, whether it's dire or not, the doctors there will, if they're over 18, the doctors will not disclose anything to you unless you have created this paperwork in advance. And so, it's just super important to get that taken care of before they go away to college.
That is such great information. I would not have even thought of that, Abby. Lisa, you kind of mentioned that you, if you don't mind unmuting Lisa Bowman, that you got your will and your other kind of documents in order, but then you realized after this conversation that there were some other things that you haven't handled. Do you want to kind of talk about your experience, or just kind of listening to this and how it's kind of opened your eyes a little bit? Like what do you feel like is missing?
Sure. So one of the things that was really interesting to me, and I have a stepdaughter, but I don't have kids. My brother does not have kids. I think about things like family recipes. I physically have my grandmother's recipe box from when she passed away a couple of years ago. There's stuff that I make for my stepdaughter that she's always like, oh, this is good. I'm like, yeah, my grandma used to make this, right? Never occurred to me that maybe someday she would like to be able to make that. We had wills done, we had health directives done, we had DNRs done, all of that, very expensive through an attorney, by the way. But the whole digital footprint, where are these things in the house? How does all of this work? That we don't have. So just really helpful to hear about some of the other things that I didn't have visibility into.
Yeah, I felt the same way, Lisa. I was kind of reading this and I was like there's so many things you don't think, because no one thinks they're going to die, even though all of us are going to die, right? And so it's kind of interesting because, I think when my father passed away when I was in my 20s, there's so many things I wish he had did. And he did, but he didn't know he was going to get in a car accident and die. And I don't want my daughter to go through that. And so please read the book if you can. It's really powerful. Abby, I don't know if you want to unmute. You have a really great question. Do you want to ask your question, Abby, Beth? And I think Abby still might be on mute. So let me ask her a question for her. So this was a fantastic conversation. Can the panel provide advice about how to have this conversation with parents who are completely unapproachable on the topic and are very controlling? I think a lot of us can relate to this, because I've actually talked to a lot of my friends who, are of this age where we are in the sandwich generation, where we're taking care of kids, but we're also taking care of elderly parents who are in their 80s, 90s, who don't want to talk about death. Do you guys want to kind of talk about how can we have these difficult conversations with people who don't want to talk about it?
Abby, you get to go first on this one.
Well, yes, I feel like we have this conversation all the time. Well, first of all, I think one thing we've learned over the years is that while we may have thought our parents were not willing or not interested in having these types of conversations, we've heard many stories from people who, once they started the conversation, everyone kind of felt really relieved and it just started flowing. And that there's this fear of having the conversation, and everyone thinks that the other person doesn't want to have the conversation, when in reality, people maybe do want to start having these conversations, and maybe they don't want to talk about what exactly is in the will or how much money is in the bank account. But even starting to talk about what you may or may not know is important. I think one of the tips that we talk about in the book is just to bring it up in the context of what you might have done. So not asking your parents for what they have done, but just starting to talk about the questions that you might be facing in your own planning. Like, I didn't even realize I needed to put my, pet's information somewhere in case, if, I don't know if you heard me talking about in the beginning, my dog has diabetes and my husband had food poisoning and I had to go to the hospital, and I realized I didn't know how to take care of our dog. Bringing up a story like that might be the beginning to having a conversation around, what type of insurance do I need? Do you guys have any insurance, or do you have a will? How should we do this? If something happens to you, who should I call? So that would be, I think that's those are a few of my comments on that.
I like Adam. This is something, because you mentioned earlier when you were doing with your mom, but knowing like how often you spoke with your dad about this planning and what that led to seems like another example.
Yeah. So I when I spoke earlier about the conversation that I had with my mom and ultimately my dad, what I can suggest is sometimes starting with something that's smaller and more practical can kind of open the floodgates. And so with my mom, the way the conversation started that ultimately led to doing her medical directives and getting a lot of other stuff in place was they were having some trouble managing her daily medications. And so I came over and sat down with them with a spreadsheet and all the pill bottles and all of the instructions, and we got everything sorted out. And in the course of doing that, it made it contextual to have some other conversations about other aspects of her medical care, to the point where we started working on her advanced directive. And what was really amazing is while we were doing that, my dad, who's totally one of those guys who keeps everything close to the vest and never wants to talk about anything like this, hopped up off the couch and ran out of the room. And he comes back like 10 minutes later and he's waving this piece of paper. And somehow he found in all of his stuff this like 80-year-old deed to the family cemetery plot. He's like, Adam, look what I found. This is where I want to be buried. And not only that, but there's a spot for my sister, and that's where she's going to be buried too. And so it was an amazing moment, because not only did I learn a whole bunch about him, and it ended up triggering some extra conversations, but it actually enabled me to send a picture of that to my cousins and say, guess what? Your mom wants to be buried here. I bet you had no idea. And it triggered conversations for them as well. And so sometimes starting with something that's small and practical can really pick up some momentum.
Of that. Cecilia has a great comment. I've begun to record my father, who's 88, his stories, his family, my mother and her family. This is lovely. He loves talking about it. I'm gathering confidence to have him start to solidify the plan for his death. It's a legacy to further generations. I know nothing about my grandparents. That it's going to make me cry, because I'm thinking about my mother right now. And, she's 85, but I want my daughter to remember her, right? And we have, let's say, some great quotes also from, I think, what is this? There's so many comments, but we have a lot of great feedback from folks. But I think we're almost out of time. For folks who are on the call, if you can kind of unmute and put yourself into gallery mode so you can see everyone. If you can, turn on your videos, because I think our guests deserve to see your lovely face. So unmute yourself, put your videos on. We want to see everyone. And I want to give a big round of applause for our guest, Abby Adam G. Woo-hoo! Yay! I don't know about you guys, but I got so much information from that. And if you kind of look at the comments today, people were inspired by your call. Thank you so much. For the folks who are on the call and also on live stream, you can learn more about the book at everplans.com/inCaseTheBook. And also participants for today can get 1 year off of the Everplan membership. Is a $75 value if you purchase a book in case you get hit by a bus. And I put a link to that as well. I'm telling you guys, I've probably gotten at least 10 neighbors to buy this, and everyone has thanked me for purchasing it. It's so easy to read. It's probably it digests really like the information that you need for in case you get hit by a bus. But thank you once again, everyone. Thank you for folks who are on live stream and everyone who's on the Zoom room as well. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.